Is the Sony RX100 Mark IV worth your money in 2024, and how does it stack up to the Fuji X100 5 and 6? Let's dive into it.
Now you give him everything you want, you understand?
The small, compact digital camera market has absolutely exploded since the Fuji X100 5 blew up on TikTok not so long ago, and even older point and shoot cameras from the 2000s have gone up in value as a result. I guess the best camera truly is the one that you have on you, and for some reason the iPhones, even though they get better and better for photography every year, they're just not cutting it for people, and a lot of people prefer to have a digital camera. I bought the Sony RX100 Mark IV for $250 on Marketplace, and as someone who really wants to try and buy the Fuji X100 6, I wanted to know, is this camera good enough to suppress my appetite to go spend all that money on the newest Fuji camera? For reference, if you wanted to pick up this camera right now on eBay, it would be $450, but if you wanted to wait a little bit, buy it locally, used, maybe on Marketplace, you can find it for a whole lot cheaper. And if you wanted to pick up the Fuji X100 Mark V, it's about $1,300, and the newest one would be $1,700 for the Mark VI, the Fuji X100 Mark VI. That's with taxes in. Before we jump into the pros and cons of picking up a cheaper $250 camera like this instead of going and buying the more expensive Fuji, I just want to say a big thank you to the 3,000 subscribers of this channel. Thank you so much for joining in the journey. It's so cool to have a community of people that relate to the stuff that I like talking about, so thank you for that. Next, I wanted to say a good way to support my channel is just to leave a like on my videos, and also I have a 99-cent preset. It kind of looks like the Fuji X100 film emulation ones. I tried my best to make it like that, and that's only 99 cents right now if you want to go pick that up. And then if you want to see the photos and videos that this camera is capable of, this $250 camera, I'll leave it in a Google Drive link below in the description. That's a whole lot of talking. Let's dive into this. So the first pro I want to talk about is the sensor of this camera. It's absolutely amazing quality. You get 20 megapixels, which to me is definitely good enough for social media, things like that, small prints. But on these Fuji cameras, you get a bigger camera sensor. It's an APS-C sensor, and on the X100V, it's 26 megapixels, and on the newer one, it's 40 megapixels. So if you really do like to crop into your images or you sell prints, those cameras would be a way better option. Secondly, I just wanted to talk about how small and compact this is. So it's super lightweight, coming in at 300 grams. The Fuji ones, they have a bigger sensor in them. They have to make them a little bit heavier. They're about 480 grams. So you do get a more travel-friendly camera with this Sony. Point number 3, I want to put video as a pro, because it's really incredible that you have really nice S-Log2 out of this camera, even though it's 8-bit color. I've been able to get awesome color grades out of it, and I know it's not the 10-bit that the Fuji cameras will have, which allows you even more flexibility to play around with colors, get your own unique style dialed in. But it is really cool to start on something like this and properly learn how to color grade. This camera is capable of shooting 4K up to 30 frames per second, and you do get better frame rates like 60 and probably 120 on the new one. But again, do you absolutely need that? And for the price difference, can you get away with just 4K 30? Really quick, if you're finding value in this video, it goes a really long way if you could just leave a like. Thank you so much, and let's dive back into the next point. The next pro I want to talk about is that this camera has built-in flash. It's a little pop-up flash, and to me, that's like a selling feature for a point and shoot like this. You can bring it to a house party, a games night, anything like that, a family event, and be able to shoot indoors and get that hard flash look, not really diffused. So I love that about this camera. Point number 5, you might not notice it at first, but this camera does have a pop-up viewfinder, which is super cool to play around with, and it's actually really good quality as well, considering this camera came out in 2015. So that's super nice to have, especially when you're shooting outdoors. Point number 6, if you are an underwater photographer, they make super cheap underwater housings for this camera. I recently did my free diving in Mexico and had to use the Sony A5000, but it was like a non-specific case for it. It was just a generic case. It was super cumbersome, but they make super cheap ones that are like specific to the RX series, which allows you to have like perfect buttons for all of the functions. And yeah, that would just be like a really cool feature to have. Underwater housings are super expensive typically, so this would be an amazing camera for that. Point number 7 is the zoom range of this camera. The Fuji X100 series has like a 23mm fixed focal length. And while that's like an amazing lens to shoot on, this one here, I've actually been loving the quality, and you also get a zoom range of 24 to 70 out of it. So to me, that is super valuable to have when it's just like the only camera you're gonna be just like throwing in a pocket and it doesn't have interchangeable lenses on it. So for me, having that zoom range is a pro. Next up, if you're into vlogging at all, this camera does have a flip up screen. So to me, that's kind of like ahead of its time, knowing that it's almost a decade old. So it is really nice just to be able to see yourself if you want to throw in a vlog here or there. Point number 9, and we're almost done with the is that this camera shoots like a high frame rate mode. It's HFR and it shoots 960 frames per second. Don't expect the best quality out of it. I think it comes in at like 720 frames per second, but it is a super cool feature to play around with, and it's nice that it is included. Point number 10, the last pro I want to talk about, is that this camera can shoot 16 frames per second in photography, just continuous if you put it into burst mode, which is super cool if you're playing around with any kind of sports photography or wildlife. So it's not all rainbows and sunshine with the $250 camera that you pick up off Marketplace. So what are the cons of this camera? Well, the first one is, yeah, it's super cool that it's so compact, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of pop-up features like my viewfinder. There's a pop-up flash going on. There's a pop-up and tilt screen going on. So there's just so much to this camera that it's super fragile. And what I've noticed so far is, yeah, it's a 10-year-old camera. It's holding up pretty good, but the lens cover does stick, and sometimes you don't notice it before taking pictures, so it looks like a heavy vignette. And the other thing I've been struggling with, not a lot, but a little bit, just standard wear and tear on these cameras, is on my zoom rocker, I'm noticing that it'll stick at a certain focal length, and then I'll need to like play around with it for like a minute to get it unstuck. So it is taking a beating a little bit. I'm not sure how the previous owner treated this, but I'm sure other people have experienced that as well with these Sony RX cameras. Con number 2 is that it is a smaller sensor size. So if you absolutely need that background separation and bokeh, an APS-C or full frame camera might be better for you. We did talk about the Fuji being an APS-C sensor, but this camera does have an aperture of 1.8 on the wide end. So it is super cool that you are able to get some sort of background separation, and you'll be able to see that in the sample video that I provide. Point number 3, and this is kind of a big one, especially if you vlog, 4K is kind of out of the question if you need image stabilization. So I was downtown in Chinatown, Victoria, and I was walking with the camera, and at first glance I was like, oh, this is gonna be fine. But I think the rolling shutter is so bad on this camera that, and also having no image stabilization at 4K, that it just like, you need to get active stabilization or a nice stable image, you need to shift to 1080p. So if you need image stabilization and 4K, probably not the best camera for you. If you're okay with 1080p, this camera will be super fine, and the stabilization is definitely good enough. The next point is that rolling shutter that I briefly mentioned. It's such a bad jello effect when you're panning left to right. I was trying to do some masks and just use like street lamps and poles to like mask into the next thing. And instead of having like a straight line, it was like completely on a diagonal, that street lamp. So if you care about rolling shutter performance, yeah, this is not great for that. Next, let's talk about 4K recording again, but this time it's a record limit. So you only have 5 minutes of continuous recording with this camera. And to me, for my use case, it'll be fine. You definitely can't use it professionally for that reason. But it is nice that it shoots 4K as we talked about. There just are some limitations to it. And while we're talking about this camera not being great for professional use, it's the battery life. The battery life on this thing is terrible. When I picked it up, it came with a case and 3 extra batteries, which is so helpful because especially when you're filming video, it's a nightmare. Like, I think it's rated for 280, 300 images. So imagine shooting video with this, the battery depletes super quick. I'm almost done bashing on this camera with the cons, but the autofocus of this camera is 9 or 10-year-old technology, which is contrast-based autofocus instead of phase detect. So it's not quite as snappy as my newer cameras like the A7 IV or even my A7 III, but those are much higher end cameras. You can't expect too much from this. But the times for where I had like a subject, like my little Mike Wazowski, and then I pulled him out of the frame, you could see it took a while to then focus on the landscape in the background. The last 2 points, because I'm being a little bit picky here, is that there's no audio input, so no mic jack. You're gonna have to record audio separately. Again, that's why it's not good for professional use. And this camera doesn't have USB-C because it is a little bit older, but that's it. That's all I have bad to say about this camera. So what are my conclusions for this camera? If you have the money and you want a bigger sensor or need a camera for video as well, Fuji all the way, just spend the money and you're not gonna be mad. But if you're like the majority of the population who has to be mindful of spending, the RX100 Mark IV might just do the trick for you. I do have a little bit of a hot take for the Fuji emulation like presets that are built into the camera. To me, it's amazing. They look so good. They're baked into the JPEG image, but your RAW is just gonna be straight out of camera colors. And for me, when I'm editing my photos, that's one of like the most fun parts of the process for me in terms of photography. So why would I wanna take that away and just pick a film emulation and then quickly post it when I like editing anyway? So to me, that's not a massive selling feature. That camera is just amazing. They go stupid, I want one. But it's like those film emulations are not a reason to just go out and spend that money. If this camera and the price sounded good to you, but you do want an interchangeable lens and a bigger sensor, check out my videos on the Sony A5000, A5100, and A6000. I compared those last year and they're still amazing cameras for 2024. I'll see you in the next video. Maddie out. Peace.